Welcome everybody, my name is Michael and today we're discussing about Carvana. You can see it a little bit there. This is the old Carvana dealership, not really a dealership, but just Carvana lot that they had here, not too far away from my house. And there was a couple Carvanas that were shut down in Illinois. Some of them that are still standing have much less units, like the towers on the highways. There's two of them within like 30 minutes away from here, and both of them you can see there's a lot less vehicles in the towers. And this one's empty. It's been empty for probably, I'd say, the past 6 months or so. Within probably the next 5-10 minutes away from my house here, we had a couple dealerships shut down, some larger, some smaller, so it's not just Carvana online. But this was a website that had big dreams. The CEO, Mr. Garcia, said it would become the world's largest and most profitable car automotive sales website dealership. Obviously, we're a little bit away from that. However, Carvana has made a U-turn. So at their highest, they hit $360. So almost $400. They rose drastically. At the same time, they were negative on every single car. And if we remember, there were so many cars being sold, leases, where people didn't expect to make any money off a lease. Usually you lose money off a lease, right? Maybe you have 1,000, 2,000 negative equity. Suddenly you had $5,000 positive equity and you're like, what? I've been leasing cars for the past 10, 20 years of my life, and this is the first time it's ever been. And Carvana was largely responsible for that. You had Vroom, which Vroom no longer exists, and it was very foreseeable considering their stock dropped like crazy. And Carvana's stock dropped from $360 to $4. Once it starts going into under $1 territory, you get some shady things happening, and you got a lot of corporate vultures that want to take over. They want to take the skin off the bones of these companies, profit, and that's it. The company's dead. It's a goner after that. Well, the CEO, Mr. Garcia, said he wants to take a complete U-turn, and he did. He absolutely did do that, because they did some cost-cutting measures, such as what's over here, where this dealership lot was shut down. And a lot of new changes were performed to how they purchase vehicles, how many employees they have, certain processes they have at Carvana. Now, I will tell you my story, as I didn't work with Carvana, but I did try and purchase a vehicle. I actually had a vehicle registered, a Hyundai Genesis. I was this close. Honestly, if Carvana was operating at a more functional level, I probably would be driving a Hyundai Genesis. This was a 2015 Hyundai Genesis. It had more technology, and I had back problems. I still do have back problems. Like right now, it's hurting me. And the Volvo S60, I loved it. I had a 2015 Volvo S60. It was a $300 monthly payment, but the problem was I couldn't sit in it. There was a period of time where it was just a little too small for me, and I also wasn't moving a lot, so that was a problem. Now I'm moving more, and it's better. But I had a tough time driving outside of the city. That car was mainly for city driving. That's why we had to purchase a larger Volkswagen Passat for our road trip to New York City, because there's no way I would be able to drive 16 hours, right? So wanted to trade out of the Volvo, and found that Carvana was willing to pay me quite a bit of money for my Volvo S60. I got it appraised at the dealership I worked at, so I worked at Infiniti at the time. Maybe Volvo would have appraised it a little bit more. But even then, we're talking a couple $1,000s difference between what the car was actually worth. And the reason I didn't have any negative equity at the time was because I put $5,000 down, $4,900 down. And I still was losing money. It didn't really necessarily make sense unless I, like then, wanted an emotional purchase because my back was hurting and I just wanted something that could be a little bit more practical. Now, I'm glad I didn't go through with it, because what ended up happening with Carvana was an absolute nightmare that month. And I absolutely loved the car later when my back was fine. I still would have appreciated, let's say, a larger Volvo S80 with just a little bit more headroom, just a little bit more legroom, but it was fine. I love that car. So essentially, I was ready to buy. I got approved for a loan with Carvana. I don't have the best credit, but I got approved. Now, it was higher interest. Still lower interest than the Volkswagen Passat that we got from CarMax. So CarMax and Carvana were those two kind of like saving graces. But Carvana was willing to pay a lot more than CarMax was. CarMax was kind of the realistic, okay, I was working in a dealership. If you have a customer that goes to CarMax, they're going to purchase the car. Everything's going to be okay. With Carvana, everything's online. So you might get a deal and, you know, let's say the car's worth $16,000 and then they end up seeing the car and they pay you $14,000. So that's why dealerships didn't necessarily want to compete against Carvana, because first of all, they were willing to pay a lot more than CarMax and it didn't make any sense. And second of all, it was all online and sometimes they would change their values. Not all the time. But there was this third aspect that right around that month that I got approved for my Hyundai Genesis and I signed the paperwork. I was ready to go. I was willing to trade in my Volvo. I forgot the numbers, but it was something like the dealership was offering me 12 grand on my car, or maybe 13 grand. And I think CarMax was willing to pay 14. Yes, there was some trade equity and taxes that I'd save with the dealership. CarMax, I didn't want to purchase at the time because CarMax was a little bit higher in price and Carvana was also higher in price. But then I saw what Carvana was willing to pay for me, for my car. It was like 16 grand or something like that, and the trade equity. And I was like, not the trade equity, but the trade-in tax relief there, basically. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'm going to be paying more for this Hyundai Genesis, a couple grand more, but the Volvo's a couple grand more, so it kind of evens out. I'll get exactly what I wanted. I'll get some more technology. Okay, sure. Lower miles, a lot lower miles. So that was a big thing. It was kind of like, okay, I don't necessarily need a newer car, and it was the same year, but a car that has a lot less miles and potentially could have lower maintenance, although later I found out that wasn't true. But it was something that was on the books, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Screw it. So I signed up for everything, and I was told, hey, my car would arrive, but, you know, they would arrive at the car. They'd appraise my car, you know, the final appraisal in person. They'd put it on the truck, and we were good to go. And 1 week passed, and there was a slight delay. No worries. Okay, next week it'll be here. And then there was another delay of another week, and then another delay. And then, you know, it turns into like a 4-week process. And I started seeing that Carvana lost their license to operate in the state of Illinois, or at least at the time it was frozen. And I realized, whoa, there's something Carvana's not telling me here. You guys lost your license. I called customer support. I already called customer support multiple times, and they're like, yeah, a lot of customers are experiencing delays. A lot of customers are experiencing delays because of what was happening to Carvana at the time, where they lost their license to operate, or it was frozen or something like that back in May a couple of years ago, because in right around that time, it wasn't the only state, Illinois, but I think it was like North Carolina and Colorado and a couple other states, like Michigan was fighting Carvana, where they already lost their license to operate over there because they had multiple issues. Cars were not arriving on time. Registrations were not being registered on time. So people who had received the cars, they already got rid of their previous car. They had to take this new car. Suddenly, they couldn't get their car registered, and it would pass 90 days, 120 days, whatever the state's laws would be. And some of these cars were being registered in Arizona, despite them being, let's say, a Colorado owner or a North Carolina owner. And that's a huge no-no. You can't do that, because Carvana's base was in, I think it was like Tempe, Arizona, or Mesa, Arizona, or whatever. So they were registering cars to, you know, it's an out-of-state transaction, and you register the car where it's the owner, their address, not somebody else's address, not somebody else's paperwork. And they were so disorganized, they were losing documentation for these purchases, for these customers. It was so disorganized that I knew Carvana had this cancel within 7-day policy as soon as you receive the car. But I haven't even received my car. I said, I want to cancel this right now. I don't want to partake in any of this. You guys lost your license. I started reading horror stories where people got their car and it was a nightmare. And let's say they did get I would get the 16,000. Yeah, that was a small risk that maybe they could have lowered it. But many of these people were receiving way too much money for their car. And you had this problem where suddenly you can't drive the car legally that you purchased. Or maybe it was a stolen car that was, they just couldn't find out, and you'd lose the car that way. Or maybe there was something really mechanically wrong, and even if you purchased the warranty, the service contract, which I did or was about to before canceling, they wouldn't honor it. I don't know. There's just so many different things going on with Carvana at that time. And I think it was just due to the fact that they were growing so quickly and they were so impatient to make a profit. They were negative at one point, negative $6,000 per each vehicle they were purchasing, and they were overpaying so much, and they realized this is a nightmare, that they started doing whatever they could, and that they started losing their licenses in certain states, which put even more pressure on them. They did regain their license to operate in Illinois. I think it was like a month later. But I canceled the transaction. I said, I don't want anything to do with it. And then like 2 months later, I get mail from Carvana. Hey, this is a power of attorney. You have registered the Hyundai Genesis successfully. And I was like, wait, what? And then later on in the future, when I would go to check insurance, I would get in questions. Which vehicles are registered to your address? You've got the 2015 Volvo. You've got the 2015 Hyundai Genesis. And I was like, I never registered this car. I canceled it. I canceled it before I even set my eyes on the car. It was weeks out from, they kept delaying it. And I don't know where that car was. Maybe they lost it. I don't no idea. There were horror stories where people never got their car. Months later, they couldn't get their money back. They wired the money somewhere else. I don't know. There was just so many bad stories at the time that I was like, I'm glad I got rid of this. And I signed the power of attorney that, yes, I'm re-releasing. Like, this isn't my car. I never even got the car. I don't want it to be registered under my name. I did get the plates, though. So the one cool thing was I got free plates, free registration. So I had to when we purchased the Volkswagen Passat, I did save like $151 because instead of getting new plates, I put transfer plates. I only had a couple months left on them because by the time we purchased it was like November, but I was cool with it. I was like, all right. But yeah, for the next year, eventually the Hyundai Genesis did disappear from our address, but that just showed how disorganized it was. I canceled the transaction and they still went ahead and, processed everything. And here you are, boom. They didn't even receive the money because it was supposed to be a finance deal with like zero down other than the trade equity. And they didn't get the trade. I signed for it, but then I canceled it before. I have no idea what was going on with it. So anyways, that was my story. In working at a dealership, I had a lot of clients that tried to sell their car to Carvana and they went to CarMax instead because CarMax was just like, okay, yeah, here you are. Here's the check. And Carvana, they would have issues. Not all the time. Sometimes Carvana would, sometimes people would have a great experience, especially for just selling your car. You're not purchasing one car and you get like $5,000 over. Of course, you're going to rave about it. You just made $5,000. You're super happy about it. But this charade eventually stopped because you had so many bad cases, so many lawsuits against Carvana. And when you really start looking into the founders and the CEOs, they were also involved in some shady stuff before. But regardless, you had a lot of issues with Carvana's stock plummeting so bad. Now they've recovered, but they had to cut a lot of losses in terms of certain vehicles, certain lots, certain employees they had. They were able to turn around where eventually they went from, when they first started in 2014, it was negative $6,000 per car they were selling. They got that down to like negative $2,000, which still sucks because you're a huge multi-billion dollar company at one point. And you can't make any profit like Uber. Except Uber had a completely different ordeal, right? You got your investors. Investors with Carvana were realizing, well, something's not right here. And then it went from -2 to -$6,000 per car in 22. And then they made their first profit in 2023 when they reorganized everything. They changed out a lot of these processes. They had to cut a lot of costs. And at one point, they were able to go from -$6,000 profit per car to $6,000 profit per car. Now it's kind of calming down, but they are trying to be more stable. So that's why the stock is pumping quite a bit. They also recently, just this past week, did a reorganization for bondholder payouts. And that's why the stock went above in like the mid 80s. So what's the future for Carvana? I'm not exactly sure if this is going to be around 10 years from now or not. It was a pretty cool business model. And at one point in time, there was a lot of happy people who sold their car for way more than the car was really worth. There was people in negative equity situations that got out of their cars, thankfully, and Carvana was behind that. Now, Carvana did lose a lot of money doing that, and it was kind of like Redfin buying a bunch of houses that they later sold for massive losses, and they just lost tens of millions of dollars per each deal. But hey, it's a learning experience. I don't know what's going to happen to this specific dealership building here. As you can see, there's quite a bit of rust on these. So I think this was owned by a different company before Carvana before then. Might get even torn down because a lot of these old dealership buildings around here in the area, some of them, like the old Saturn, was torn down. I think they had an old Nissan building that was torn down. Dealerships like to move lots constantly. You know, they want to, you know, as soon as they're getting more and more vehicles, they want to upsize. They want to have a larger lot, more employees, greater service bays. Got a fair amount of service bays in there too. So overall, the concept was pretty cool. And, you know, Carvana is kind of like at that weird crossroads right now where it could succeed. It could be an amazing company in the future. It could be like the CarMax, or it may fail. We don't know. It's still around. So they have recovered from $4 to $85. That's huge. But it's certainly not stable right now. So it's getting stabler, but it's not there yet. It can't compete against dealerships just yet, or AutoNation, these Lithia, these large networks. But it is certainly an interesting concept. So that's my story for today. Just wanted to share that with you, how I almost purchased a Hyundai Genesis, but I couldn't because they lost my car and they lost their license, and I don't know, so canceled that. But thanks for watching. If you had a fun Carvana story, please share it down below. And that is that. Have a good one and take care.